This is Real Estate Rookie episode 403. House hacks are a great way to share your space and to cut living expenses, but can also be a recipe for disaster when your dinner plans don't go the way you wanted and affect your tenants. My name is Ashley Kerr, and welcome to the Real Estate Rookie podcast, where 3 times a week we give you the motivation, inspiration, and stories you need to hear to get started in real estate investing. Today, we have Reischel. Sean and his wife, Perry, have grown a portfolio of 5 small multifamily units to $2.7 million in assets across 2 states, including Utah and Kentucky, by creatively finding ways to use their properties. He did experience some strain on his first house hack deal, and we will hear how that turned out for him as a first-time landlord. Before we get into today's show, if you want to be on this episode and tell me your horror story, go to biggerpockets.com/reply. Sean, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Ashley. Great to be here.
Yeah. So kind of tell us a little bit about this first property. You moved to a new city, and kind of give us a little backstory of where you were in your life at that time.
Sure. So I was a civil engineer at the time, and I was living in New Jersey. I moved to Salt Lake City around like March 1st of 2020. And we were in the office for 2 weeks, and then everybody went home to work remotely because COVID started. And in the beginning, I realized that my 40-hour per week job I could essentially do in like 20 hours per week. So I was like, what do I do with all this time? And I started playing video games. I was playing like Call of Duty, Counter-Strike, shooting games. And so then I looked in the mirror after like a month. I was like, what am I doing? Like, I'm just wasting my time playing video games. So I started realizing that I had money for the first time in my life. I was a pretty new employee, and I decided to research investing. And after going through a few podcasts, I actually found the Bigger Pockets Real Estate podcasts, started listening to Brandon and David. Just started like going to the basketball hoop, shooting, listening to 2 hours of podcasts. And then I heard about the 90-day challenge, started that, and found an agent and essentially bought a house, is the short story, in Salt Lake City.
So how long after this move did you buy this property?
So I moved in March, and I closed on June 18th, 2020.
So pretty much within that 90-day time frame.
90 days, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what goes on in this horror story? So far, it seems like you're doing pretty good. You've moved to a new city. You've, given up some of your video game time. You've done your research. You don't have analysis paralysis. You took action on your first property. And so tell us a little bit about that property.
Sure. So it was a triplex. It is a triplex still in Sugar House, which is a little bit south of downtown in Salt Lake City. I remember I wasn't sure where to buy. I was looking all over the Salt Lake Valley. It's relatively large, and found this triplex that clearly had below market rents and clearly needed some work. I didn't know, I had no experience at this time either. I just decided I was going to do it, learn along the way. So I bought it with a conventional investment loan through a local lender. I couldn't afford it myself, so I had to pull in a partner who was my cousin who was interested in real estate investing. So I was unable to purchase it myself and had to pull in funds that way. And there was a tenant living in the upstairs unit who I had to kick out essentially because it was a primary residence loan as well, which allowed me to get a better rate. And so I started house hacking in this triplex right from the beginning. They allowed me to. I essentially was paying about $500-$600 a month just to live there because the other people were paying for my mortgage as well.
What would you have paid if you were renting that unit yourself and you were a tenant there? What would you have paid in rent to live there? And now you're only paying $500 a month.
Sure. It would have been about $1,000 to $1,100.
So quite a great savings there, about $600 in your cost of living expenses you're able to save now. Before we get into the horror story part, and maybe this actually has something to do with it, describe how you got your cousin to partner with you and how you were able to structure that deal.
Sure. So I essentially reached out to him. I said, hey, I'm looking to invest in real estate. He knew me growing up, so he trusted me. He knew I was an engineer. I knew how to run numbers. So I essentially presented him with the deal. he said, sure, let's do it. It wasn't actually that difficult. I had a pretty good relationship already. Relationships are very important in this industry. So, and I felt a little guilty at first because he was family. I was like, what if I fail? But I knew he was in it for me. He trusted me. And so it ended up working out for us in the long term because I was willing to kind of put in the work as well. It wasn't just it was a bit of luck because the market went up. But other than that, yeah, he provided 60 grand towards the down payment. I put in 40 grand that I had saved up. And we actually structured it to be, he paid, it was a $450,000 property, and we did 60 divided by 450 was his percentage of the property, which is not actually fair, I don't think, anymore. So we have since restructured it to be a 50-50 ownership. So that's how I pulled him in. He didn't know much about it at all, which is why he was willing to accept that sort of ownership expense. It was about 15% him, 85% me.
And that's the thing with partnerships is it doesn't actually have to be fair, especially when you're first getting started and it's your first deal. There's definitely a benefit. I did the same exact thing my first deal. I gave, the other person had it way better off than I did, but I wanted that experience. I wouldn't have taken action without having the partner because I didn't have the money. And then you can always restructure too down the road, or you can create a new LLC that has a different structure. You're not, as long as your operating agreement doesn't state you're set in it, you can renegotiate your operating agreement to change that. So that's the wonderful thing about partnerships is that you don't have to be locked in forever being in that same percentage. If you both agree, you can go ahead and change it.
I was just going to say that's why the relationship's good, because we had that honest dialogue between each other. And I was willing to realize, okay, this was very unfair for him at first. He gave a lot more than he got back. So we restructured that after about 2 years.
So you have the property, you moved in, the person in one unit moved out. And where does the story go from here?
Sure. So I moved in about August. I moved in with my parents for like 2 months, gave her some time to move out. She did. I moved in, and my now wife moved in with me at the time, and we started renovating the property together and cutting down some things that didn't need to be there, retiling some backsplash. And then at one point, this was about November, been there for about, 5 months now. And I had never had a sewage system before. I grew up with a septic tank kind of in rural New Jersey. And my dad always yelled at us whenever we put anything down the sink, like even the smallest little speck of food. He's like, put it in the trash. We have a septic system. It's going to destroy it.
Yeah.
So for the first time in my life, I had a garbage disposal, and I was just going crazy, like putting full oranges down there, full lemons, you name it, just turning it on.
This is so relatable to my life too. My dad was exactly the same, and we never had a garbage disposal ever. It's either, yeah.
It's just so satisfying when you just hear it churn and it all disappears. You never have to worry about it. So one night I was making pasta, and I didn't actually have like a colander. It was a pot with a strainer on it. And as I was straining the water out, it fell out and all the spaghetti fell down the drain. And I was like, all right, whatever. This is what the disposal is for, right? So I turned it on. It started going down, and then it all stopped, and it filled up with water. And I was like, uh-oh. I thought it was supposed to go down. I was supposed to turn it up. And then over the next 24 hours, pretty much, there were like 8 series of all the water slowly draining. I would try running water, forcing it through again. It would fill up 8 separate times. I put Dawn down there with boiling water. I tried everything, YouTubed everything. And eventually, after that 8th time, I think I put a lot of Dawn down there, and I turned it on, and it all went down. And I was so happy. I was like, we just worked our way through it. I started like dancing in my kitchen immediately. I remember, like, so happy. And my phone starts ringing, and my tenant downstairs is calling me instantly. And I'm like, what the heck? So I picked up my phone, and she's like, our ceiling is gushing water.
Oh my God. Maybe your first thought is like, oh, I'm too loud. They're hearing me dancing.
Yeah.
But oh my gosh, gushing water. What is your initial reaction with that? So you're in this moment, talk about an emotional roller coaster. You're in this moment of happiness. You think the problem is solved, and now you have an even worse problem on your hands.
Yeah, this was like the first big problem that happened too that I've ever experienced. Like, a ceiling just ripped apart over their bathroom, which they use multiple times a day. So I ran down. I just saw a gaping hole in the ceiling. They were looking at me like, what the heck are we supposed to do? Like, we live here. So I had an industrial sized mop. I just started mopping, sweeping. I had no idea what to do. Again, I have no experience this time. I don't know. They're asking me questions. I have no answers. Like, how much is this going to cost? How do we fix this? I don't know. So I just started cleaning up, starting to dry it. I remember I put a space heater up in the ceiling because there was a huge hole. And they're like, is that going to start a fire? I was like, I don't think so, but I don't know.
So let me ask, when all this water is gushing down, is any of like the food that you put into the garbage disposal coming out of it too? Is that like the cause of it?
All of it. Yeah.
So like just noodles?
Noodles, whatever else was in there before, who knows?
Oh my gosh.
What happened was the old people had a PVC pipe going into a stainless steel like supply line that went then into an ABS pipe. And that stainless steel pipe must have been there. The house was built in 1911 and it must have been there from like the original construction. And one of the joints just exploded. Like there was a huge hole in the stainless steel that I took pictures of.
Wow. Okay. So you're trying to mop it up. Not really sure what to do. You can't answer any questions. Where do you go from here? Who is like your first phone call? Who are you trying to contact? Where are you going from there?
I had a handyman, luckily, who was referenced on the inspection report that I got. So I called him up. I had used him previously for, I think, one thing. And I called him. I was like, have you ever experienced this before? He's like, yeah, we do this all the time. This is like my life. So that at least appeased some worries initially. I also called the insurance company. I had no idea how much this was going to cost. I ended up calling insurance. They came out to get a quote. And at about the same time, the tenants turned to me and said, hey, I think we want to move out and end our lease early.
So Sean, tell us, how did you end up finding out how much it was cost? You left us with, you called the insurance company, your tenants are saying they're moving out. Where does it go from here?
So the insurance guy came, I think it was next day. They were pretty good about that. And he looked at the damage and he's like, honestly, I think you should just try and fix this yourself. You could file a claim. It's going to be a lot of paperwork, but I don't think it's going to be that bad. I was like, what? Really? I had no frame of reference to even work with.
Yeah.
So, and then, about 2 or 3 hours after the hole in the ceiling appeared, the tenants came to me and they said, yeah, we want to terminate our lease early. We don't feel safe here. There might be asbestos in there and I have some lung problems. And I was like, you know what? Okay, fine. Go for it. We had planned to renovate the unit at some point in the future. We just didn't know when. So if they were going to give us a 4-month head start, we said, sure, let's go do it. So instead of getting insurance, I had the handyman come up. He looked at it. He's like, I think I could do that for about $400 or $500. And I was like, okay, I can handle that.
What was your deductible on your insurance policy? Do you know where you would have had to pay that anyways up front?
I think it would have been at least $1,000. So
yeah. So either way, you would have been paying it if you ran it through the insurance. So it didn't really matter at that point. Yeah.
Exactly. And the insurance guy was honest with me and I appreciate that.
Yeah, instead of having to go through the headache of doing all the paperwork just to be told that it's your deductible anyways. And having that claim too on your policy.
Yeah, on the record for sure.
Okay, so with your tenants, I'm curious as to, did they just like start packing and they're out of there? Or did they actually like take some time and find another place and then move out?
They were gone in about a week. I think they had really wanted to leave before then anyway. So it kind of worked out for them. And the good thing is we knew we wanted to renovate it, my wife and I, and we were going to put it off later, but we just took this as an opportunity, honestly, to say, hey, let's do this now. Let's start scraping the paint off the wood floors and bring that beautiful wood out. Let's start renovating the kitchen. And we started demoing the bathroom instantly. So we didn't fix the hole in the ceiling for about 2 months because we were renovating the bathroom and we weren't sure exactly. We needed some sheetrock to put up there. And it was a whole process. So we use this kind of as a catalyst to start our renovation down there.
What about like the emotional factor in this? Did this kind of scare you at all into continuing your real estate investing journey? Like, man, I lived right here. I was upstairs. I was able to run downstairs and at least assess the situation. But if you buy another property, you're not right there. Did you have any of these kind of fears going on? And what about Perry too? What was she thinking in this moment, your wife?
Well, absolutely. That was probably the lowest point of my investing career, honestly. Um, Not just the financial portion of it, but also realizing that I had these people, like these two people's livelihoods and living experience that I was responsible for, and I just put a hole in their ceiling. So I felt terrible about that, honestly. Like the second they called me and I ran down there, just all this weight just dropped on me, and I could feel that. And that was a heavy burden. That is something that, as a real estate investor, you do have to deal with and learn how to cope with, and figure out ways to. These things are going to happen, I found out, and you need to figure out how to, I guess, emotionally handle yourself while you're emotionally dealing with other people, because people have emotions and they're real and they're going to get mad at you. And they were definitely mad at me for putting spaghetti through their ceiling, and I had to figure out how to deal with that and then move on from that. And it was shifting from that. You have to go through that emotional reaction initially. That's just how we are as humans. And then you take a step back and you separate yourself from the situation and you say, okay, there's a hole in the ceiling. I need to fix that. There's tenants who need to move out. I need to renovate or get it rented out. And you just start looking at it objectively. And once you can sort of identify that problem, the problems that exist and the solutions for them, all of that fear starts to subside, because your ignorance goes away about the whole, how you're going to get out of the situation. And that exact thing happened during this scenario. It was just all immediately, oh my goodness, these poor people, my poor house, my poor future. What am I going to do? And then it all works itself out, honestly. Like, that's the mentality you have to stick with when these things happen, because they're not avoidable. They are going to happen, and you're going to be responsible for them. So you have to figure out how to adjust your emotions to get through them.
That was great, Sean, right there. And I 100% agree of, being able to control your own emotions and how you react to the situation and how it affects you, and understanding how it's affecting people that are living there. Like, that is their home, and having that responsibility, that weight on your shoulders, because there is that gray area of like, well, if they lived in their own home, they wouldn't have it fixed immediately either. But there's just that fine line of like, they're living in a property where they're paying to have somebody else take care of those problems. And that's part of the reason that they're living there. So they don't have to take care of those things. And, creating that urgency of wanting to get repairs done timely, and, making sure it's a great living experience, but also the cost of it coming up as to like, how much can you handle? Because you were planning 4 months later to actually do the rehab. So, that kind of puts a constraint on your budget as to, was that a problem for you, or is something difficult to overcome, as far as like, we weren't planning to spend the money for the rehab for another 4 months, and now we have to cough up that money right now?
It ended up not being a problem. I had a decent job, a pretty good paying salary at an engineering firm. So I had enough money. I probably didn't have as much as I wanted to, but the money came in a weird way. Whether I had to put in more labor, I hired some people for some things, then okay, I didn't have enough money for it, so I had to do it. And that was the nature of this entire property. Is like, how do I want to pay people as much as I can so I can save my time, but I'm also just starting out. So I knew I had to put in that sweat equity to get it to the point that I wanted to. So it was that balance throughout that entire renovation. When it was so technical in the bathroom, like I had to have somebody do the plumbing for the bathroom because I didn't know, or like waterproof the shower. I didn't feel comfortable doing that. But like scraping the wood floor, it was just labor. I could do that.
How much time did you have into this rehab? And then how much did you end up paying out for the rehab?
So the time into it took me about 3 months of actually renovating. How much did I have to pay out? Probably about $5,000 of it in total. I paid a handyman. He would come maybe Tuesday, I'd pay him for his hours. He would come Thursday, I'd pay him for his hours. And I had that relationship with him. He was fitting me in between the jobs other jobs he had. So I did really make it work. And that allowed me to budget it appropriately too. I was able to just take it over time instead of having just a big contract up front, because I didn't know exactly what we wanted to do and what needed to get done. So that helped at least do it sequentially.
And then during that time frame, you obviously had to pay more for your mortgage, or was there still another tenant in place in the third unit that was covering your mortgage?
I did have to cover that. Yeah. So that was a hit for sure. But the good news is coming full circle, we were renting it for it was $900 before they moved out. And when we finished the renovation, my wife and I, it became a $1,400 rental unit.
Wow. $500. Yeah.
Yeah. The price of the damage to the ceiling, essentially. So I like to pull that comes full circle at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. 1 month's new rent could cover the cost of of the increase. Okay. So what happens next? You overcome this obstacle of the noodles coming out of the ceiling and you're finishing up the remodel in this triplex. Do you have it refinanced at all, or do you just keep your current loan on it?
I didn't refinance yet. I ended up refinancing later that year. We finished about February of 21, and my wife and I refinanced in November of 21 when we were able to pull. The market went crazy over that time, as everyone's kind of familiar with. And yeah, we were able to pull a lot of money out and figured what we want to invest it more in more properties. So at that time, we started figuring out what do we want to do with this? Do we want to stay in Salt Lake? Salt Lake's very saturated and the prices are really high. So I started listening a lot more to the real estate podcast. And I heard David Green talk about Louisville, Kentucky once. And my wife at the same time was making a list of like low price, high rent properties, areas around the country. And Louisville was on her list as well. So things started to line up with that. And so we started researching Louisville properties, and she bought a property in Louisville that we split equity on, and we ended up moving there and started renovating the triplex that we had just bought there.
So did you buy 2 properties there, or that triplex was the one that you bought first?
We bought a triplex, and then we ended up buying 2 more before we left 3 months later. So in the course of 3 months, we essentially bought 3 properties. Okay,
so on this triplex, before we move forward, I want to know, what did it actually appraise for when you were done? And did you keep all of the units as long-term rentals, or what was your strategy on them?
Sure. So when we refinanced for $670. We had bought it for $450 a year and a half earlier. So we were able to pull out about $120,000 from that refinance, which literally changed my life. If you think about it, that was the first time I'd ever seen 6 digits in a row in my name. So yeah. That amount of money will change your life. And so at about that time, we were deciding what to do next with our real estate endeavors. That's kind of why we ended up getting the refinance too. We knew we were going to get some more cash. And so we were researching new markets to go to, because Salt Lake was a bit saturated and the prices were high. So at about the same time we were doing this, knowing we were going to move out of Salt Lake, we also were beginning to investigate Airbnbs and the potential income increase that you could get. And we were researching Salt Lake, and it actually fit like all the boxes. It was a tourist destination. They had skiing in the winter, amazing hiking in the summer, and festivals all throughout the spring and fall, and things that would draw people there. We were near downtown. We were near the University of Utah, near Westminster College and Sugar House, like fitting all the boxes. So we said, let's try it. So my wife got me Short-Term Rental, Long-Term Wealth by Avery Carl. And I read that, and it was all clicking. It made sense. So we ended up hiring a management company, knowing that we were about to move to Kentucky. I haven't really gotten into that yet. We were going to buy an investment in Kentucky and rent out the unit that we were living in as an Airbnb, as sort of a trial run. The other 2 units in the property remained as long-term, and we tried this top unit out as an Airbnb to see if it worked. We wanted to keep the reserves coming in from the guaranteed long-term.
So when you moved, were you managing these yourselves, or did you hire property management?
I knew the tenants well enough in the long terms to keep them as my own management, but we didn't know what was going on with Airbnb. So we hired a manager to set up the listing, get the photographers, communicate with guests, automate the check-in instructions, things like that we didn't know at all. Avery warned me not to do that in the book, and I should have listened to her at first. It was kind of good to see what they were doing while we were in Kentucky and see what they were doing wrong, essentially, which was a lot of things, which I can get into. But after about 4 months of using that management company and just finally deciding to listen to Avery, we fired them and just took over management. And once we did that, life got so much easier because we had a sort of standard of care that we were willing to give to these people, and they were not giving that to them because they were worried about all their other properties as well, which happens with management companies for Airbnbs, which is part of the game, I guess. You just have to, you're one of their people. But once we were able to take it over, Airbnb automates all the instructions. They make it very easy. And every now and then we have to respond to something through the app. But we've been doing this for 2 years now, and it's been rather easy. Sometimes we don't even know when somebody's going in and out of the house. We completely forget. And it's purely passive income in that regard.
Yeah, if anyone wants to check out Avery's book, you can go to thebiggerpockets.com and check out the bookstore, and her book is available there. So Sean, you mentioned you had heard David Green talk about this market. Your wife had this on a list of different markets she was interested in investing in. So tell us more. What did you find out when you started analyzing?
Sure. So we found out that a lot of the properties in this Louisville market were all meeting the 1% rule, just on Zillow, pretty much. So that was like the first criteria that we were looking for everything. So if everything was meeting it, then we knew we could find a way to make it work long term. We had just refinanced our property in Salt Lake City. So now we had all this cash, and with the rates where they were about 3.5% and time on our side as mid 20-year-olds, we just decided to go for it and know that we would figure it out along the way.
Yeah. Can you just describe what the 1% rule is for anyone that doesn't know?
Yeah. Oh, the 1% rule is if you look at a property's price, if it's $300,000 and on a monthly basis, it pulls in $3,000 per month, that is a property that meets the 1% rule. It's sort of just a first filter that investors use to filter out properties that they want to buy. So if it were at 2,500 instead of 3,000, it would not meet the 1% rule.
So with this market, you've found this out. Are there any other criteria that you're using to analyze the market besides the 1% rule?
We looked a little bit at population percentage increases, and it was sort of towards the high end. I forget exactly what we were looking at the time. To be honest, after we saw the 1% rule and we knew that we didn't know how long the rates were going to be the way they were. And as you could tell from the Salt Lake one, I don't really have that much analysis paralysis. I kind of just go for it. And that was the mentality with this as well. My wife was into it. She was so on board with this real estate stuff once she saw that big check. But not to say that that's all that's there. But once we saw how it was working for us, we decided to just go for it and know we were going to figure it out along the way. So in all honesty, the answer is no. We just looked at the rent that it was pulling in with the property price and knew we could afford it long term.
And you mentioned you bought 3 properties at once there, or within 1 year. So how were you able to fund those properties?
Sure. So every single property that we own is some sort of creative ownership situation. We don't own anything individually because A, I just couldn't afford I wouldn't be able to afford all these properties, and B, once I found out that the Salt Lake property was helping both myself and us and our partner, I realized that we could help people in our inner sphere to grow their wealth as well, grow their investing portfolio. So on one of the properties, my brother is an investor with his friend, and my wife and I. On another property, it's another friend from college and my wife and I. And on the other property, we have another investor as well. And now our job has gone from now we don't live there anymore. So we actually have a manager there who takes care of our properties, which is a whole other can of worms I get into. But now we manage the manager and we manage our investors. And that's kind of how we've become investors in this way, in the true form. We manage these relationships now.
So you're the asset manager now.
More or less, yeah. We've worked our way up to that spot.
Yeah, that's a nice position to be in. Yeah. Asset manager and investor relations. And talk about having the benefit of having a little piece of the pie compared to no piece of the pie. Sometimes it is better to partner with others so that you can get started in real estate and start to propel yourself rather than waiting to save up your down payment, you get one property, then waiting and waiting and waiting again to save up for the next, to get the next property. Instead, partnering with people so that you can get that little bit, which starts to add up to a lot, and getting started sooner rather than later. As we've seen, you've already built a ton of equity just in your first property, where if, think about it, you would have waited even longer until you had all the money yourself, you probably would have been buying that property at 650 instead of the 450 when you took action now. Yeah. So that's awesome. Now, in this Kentucky market, what's next for you guys? Are you still planning to invest more there? Are you looking at other markets?
Sure. So we are no longer looking at Kentucky. We're fine where we are there. We want to go back to Salt Lake City is our next move. We actually live in Denver right now. We moved there once we got married. We have a lot of family here, but we have the system set up in Salt Lake City to have more Airbnbs. So we're looking at duplexes, triplexes near that existing Airbnb that we have to grow that portfolio. We are dead set on growing that portfolio because we know it works and works really well.
And that's the awesome thing, is sticking to something you already know and having that business, that process, those systems all set up where it's so easy. And I think it can get boring and mundane almost, as to you can probably buy a property there in your sleep. You can get it operating in your sleep. You know how it goes. And then there's all this shiny object, syndrome, oh, that looks really cool. Maybe we should go there. But when you stick to, you build such a great foundation for yourself. And that's what really builds wealth, just repeatedly doing the same thing over again. And if you know exactly what you have to do in the Salt Lake market, that is great that you're going back to that foundation you built and just continuing to make it stronger and stronger and stronger and building your wealth. Sean, I want to ask about the roles that you have with your wife, Perry, as to in your business. You said you're doing investor relations, you're doing asset management. What are the roles between you two in your business today?
Sure. That's a great question. So I was doing a lot, this is up until about a month ago, I was doing a lot of the management relations and communicating with the manager. We actually had a boutique manager and he was texting us directly, and I was doing a lot of that communication. And we realized that we were doing the wrong thing. She was working with the investors more and I was working with the manager more. But I get a lot more caught up in that stuff, where she's able to just instantly objectively look at things and just be like, okay, we'll fix it this way. So last month, actually, we switched it where she's now taking care of all of those management communications, even Airbnb communications. I was doing most of it. She's started handling that so that I can now focus on buying new properties and bringing those to new investors. Because she would show me in the evening, she would show me a new property on Zillow. She's like, this one just came on. Can we buy it? And I'd be like, oh, goodness, I can't even imagine adding something else to my plate right now. It was just weighing on me so heavily.
Because especially when you get a deal in front of you, you have you just have to analyze it quick. Just you know what? I was going to go to bed, but somebody just sent me a deal. Now I got to kind of look real quick.
Yeah. It was just too much. It was too much for me to handle. So that's a testament to setting up the systems that we in Salt Lake City. We just have these systems in place. We don't really ever have to worry about anything. But so we've switched that, and now we're, I guess, a lot closer to actually buying our next property. That's our next move, is to buy this property in Salt Lake City. We toured one when we were out there last week. We're not going to buy it because half of the house is falling away from the other half. That's a different story, but we're about to buy one very soon. And now I feel more comfortable. We know that the Airbnbs in Salt Lake City work, so I'm much more comfortable presenting these to investors now. As I can show them what's worked in Salt Lake City and Sugar House and why it's also going to work for this property right down the road. It makes it easier.
And what would you say has built that confidence in yourself as to, I feel confident I can go out and give somebody an opportunity to give me money, invest with me, and they're going to be making money off of it, that this is a great investment for you? How did you kind of create that confidence of, I feel okay, especially, you started out as a new investor, and your first deal, you brought on a money partner. So maybe give some tips and advice as to someone listening who has that fear of that confrontation of asking someone to invest with them, ask them for money. How did you build your confidence to do that?
So to be honest, it's because I've seen spaghetti fall through my ceiling that I now have that confidence where people know that I've been in the quote unquote trenches and know the things that can go wrong. That's what people really fear. Is ignorance is fear, and people just don't know how bad it could be, how good it could be. You have to present those things to people, and if you have gone through the worst possible scenario where spaghetti's falling through your ceiling, maybe not worse, but people can relate to that, and they know that you have that experience that they can trust even more. So it's dealing with those things. It's dealing with a $6,000 water bill on a property in Kentucky that came out of nowhere, that we have no idea how it got there. Things like staircase that was falling apart on another property in Kentucky. We didn't even talk about that because I've just been at this point now where we know how to handle those things. We've gone through the horror story of spaghetti falling through the ceiling. It's not going to get worse than that. So that's how I frame it to people. I've been through the tough stuff to know how to handle it.
It right there, I think, is such a great attribute. If you are looking to invest with someone, is ask them, how is your investing gone? And if you hear that it's all roses and gold and glory and nothing has gone wrong, then first of all, maybe they haven't gone through anything difficult yet, so they will have no idea what to do when that happens. But if they're completely honest with you as to like, these things happened and this is what I did and this is how I overcame it, and you know what, moved on. That's great advice there, Sean. So thank you so much for joining us today and giving so much great advice, your lessons learned and how you overcame things. We really appreciate you coming onto the show today.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me. This is great.
If you'd like to learn more about Sean, his information will be in the show notes or in the description. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, please give us a follow. And before we leave this week, we want to give a shout out to Kendall Phillips, this week's rookie rock star. So Kendall says, I am delighted to share this news. I successfully closed on this brand new rental property in South Carolina. This is my 8th rental property, and I'm so impressed for the effort of my team so far. From the search of the ideal property to negotiating favorable terms, it's been a rewarding journey. So congratulations, Kendall. That is awesome on your 8th rental and being able to outsource a lot of the work to get that deal to a team and building out your team. And we'll see you guys next time. My name is Ashley. Thanks for joining us on the Real Estate Rookie Podcast.